a leader, how do you stay relevant in a world ruled by AI?
Embedding AI into my professional world, into my personal world. And that is number one, productivity. My aspirations are essentially be a better leader, grow my acumen underneath business, underneath sales, underneath technology.
It's making humans efficient. It's to help make decisions faster, quicker, easier, more accurate.
Experience fuels how we communicate versus listen. I think it's so important to just understand the difference sometimes, right?
Leaders who don't adapt AI or are resisting it, what's the future look like for them?
Can they be more profitable? Can they grow with AI?
With the help of AI, we can see a single employee running $1 billion company by 2026. How close are we to that reality? In this conversation with Roshan Bharat from Microsoft, we dove into a lot of aspects of the uses of AI, the impact on sales, and how organizations need to be protecting their data, and the risk it presents if the security measures are not properly taken. This is a conversation for anyone who wants to understand how to start engaging and leveraging AI for their business. Anyone who needs to understand where they can start, the importance of security in this landscape today, why it matters now more than ever, and how do you as an organizational leader find the right people within your organization or hire externally or bring in partners to solve your AI challenges and problems. This is something that anyone who's thinking about or considering leveraging AI in their business really needs to tune into. Roshan, welcome to T-Talks.
Thank you very much, PJ. Great to see you.
Yeah, likewise. It's a pleasure to have you, my friend. Roshan, I want to get right into your title. You lead Microsoft's North American Partner SME and C sales organization. What does that really mean?
I am part of a great group of individuals that are responsible for sales, essentially, through our partners in North America. But the best title I have is father, husband, at home, where I live, and the people that I surround myself with in my family. That's my title.
I love that. That is awesome. It just shows your leadership style. It's very human centric, is what I'm gathering from that, which is really cool. Which is lacking in some cases today, but I
hope so. I hope it is. I aspire to be a human first leader. I don't know if I'm the best, but that's my aspiration for sure.
Well, listen, we're all learning. We're all getting better every moment. We all make mistakes, and the best thing we can do is learn from those mistakes and recover. And I think that becomes a huge element of any leadership style. Because
absolutely,
we're as Satya says it best, right? We're a learn it all, not a know it all, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's the approach that I think we all need to take and embrace.
100% growth mindset, right?
Exactly. So speaking of growth mindset, Roshan, tech is changing, sales landscape is changing.
Mm-hmm.
As a leader, how do you stay relevant in a world ruled by AI?
I get this question very often, actually, and I ask this question a lot as well with the folks that I engage with in the professional world and also in the personal world a little bit as well, just in terms of how we're keeping up with AI. There's so much that we can unpack this in terms of use cases and in terms of enhancing the way we go after our day-to-day activity across the board. And if I were to categorize it, I would say there's a couple of different areas that me personally, I have experience with and I'm learning through as it pertains to embedding AI into my professional world, into my personal world. And that is number one, productivity. I think when you look at the pursuit of your role, and especially me, when I look at the pursuit of my role in terms of the aspirations I have, my aspirations are essentially be a better leader, be a better business leader, grow my acumen underneath business, underneath sales, underneath technology. And I look at AI encompassing those categories in terms of how I enhance my productivity to learn how to be better in those areas. So for example, if on the leadership category, if I look at a book, there was a book that I was studying recently, a little bit of an old one, but one that I was studying just in terms of getting familiar and getting better in my leadership capability. That's called Shoe Dog by the author Phil Knight, the Nike company, the Nike story, right? And one of the things that I've been able to do is I read the book and I wanted to share summarizations of the key nuggets that I've grabbed from the book. And I'd look at an AI tool like Copilot to summarize some of those key moments that I can then regurgitate to my team, regurgitate to the folks around me that I believe would benefit from it. But regurgitation is one thing. Adaptability and applicability of what you're regurgitating to who is another thing. And I think AI just helps you, especially Copilot, helps you translate what you want to get out of a summary like that and make it applicable to the personalities you're engaging with based on the experiences you have with that individual. Because some of those messages could be at a mature status, some could be at an immature status, depending on the experience of the individual, right? So I think that's one area. The other area is around business acumen. And this is kind of master of the obvious, very, very, very common and very popular right now. When you're engaging with an individual or a company that you're consummating business opportunities with, you'd want to understand that business. You'd want to learn about the individuals you're engaging with. You'd want to learn about how they make money, how they reduce risk, how they perform customer service. And you'd use a productivity element with AI to enhance how you understand the company, how you research the company. And I think that's a really important moment. And then the third component that I mentioned there, just in terms of your own personal growth, brand building, social content, being able to be out there, like what you and I are doing right now, just kind of sharing context, sharing learnings, being able to connect, being able to build your brand, essentially. I think there's a strong component of how AI can understand you, understand what you're pursuing, and help you around that, build your brand in terms of what you're trying to achieve, right? And so those are some of the categorizations that I would see. I use it a lot with my son, my family at home as well, by the way. I have a son that's growing almost into a teenager, and it loves video games. And we have a little bit of fun with AI, just getting into some content, into some drawing. And it's really cool in terms of getting creative on the personal side as well. And being able to see, like, I'm from obviously a different generation. So being able to see my kids, like, kind of leverage this productivity tools in their daily activity, personal and at school as well, it's a pretty special thing. So yeah, hopefully I give you a lot there, but hopefully that gives you what you're asking.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a lot there to uncover. I mean, you talk about, productivity, adaptability, the technology itself giving you golden nuggets from books that you're looking at.
Yes.
And going into, improving your business acumen, researching, like there's a ton that we can do. And this is exactly how I use this technology today. Right? So productivity is one of the key elements I focus on because for me, it's making humans efficient. And if we look at, the core of AI, irrespective of the use case, it's really to help with efficiencies. It's to help make decisions faster, quicker, easier, more accurate. So when we look at it and you compass it with productivity, I think you're spot on. But when we look at adaptability, there's a challenge right now with people trying to understand, how do they adapt this technology? Right. How do they get started? Where do they get started? One of the big challenges I have, especially when I'm doing speaking engagements as well, is having individuals understand how this technology is different than your regular search engine. It's not a typical search engine, because on a search engine, you're going out there and you're actually researching and you're making that decision. I loved, and I don't know if you recall this or not, but going back several years ago, I remember when I was still at Microsoft, there was something very interesting when Bing was launched. It was very fascinating because what the leadership teams had actually said is that they don't want another search engine. They want a decision engine, right? Something that helps you make decisions. And when I look at this AI realm now, I think we're there, right? The engine actually now gives you the actual answers you're looking for so you can make a decision rather than deciphering through information. Your tips or advice on how users can get started with this technology?
Immersion is the power of inclusion and decision-making and ultimately adaptability, right? I'm going to give you a little bit of a far-fetched analogy. So just follow me and just give me some rope with this one. One of the most powerful things in inclusion, in diversity and inclusion, as an example, is having the ability to immerse yourself in a different culture. So you obviously live in Canada. One of the biggest things in Canada right now is the diversity of all these different cultures. In Ontario, of course, you have Quebec, which is obviously very French-speaking, right? One of the most powerful things of immersion within those cultures is being able to meet people where they're at, being able to understand a different language, being able to understand a different culture, being able to understand how people do things differently. And when you look at overall the enhancement of productivity and adapting to how that helps you in life, it's the immersion of the decisions you're trying to execute on every day, or specific tasks at hand, whether it's your business, whether it's your projects, whether it's your job, or whether it's just personal immersion in different cultures through D&I, diversity and inclusion. And so I think when you apply really that concept of wanting to get immersed into something different, into something that you want to learn, where you see the opportunity, it will automatically enhance how you more productive and how you are more effective with decision making that you talked about there, essentially, right? So I think that's one of the key things. It's really that growth mindset that you and I talked about earlier on that translates into growth mindset, learning, curiosity, immersion, adaptability, productivity, execution. It's kind of like a loop almost, right? When you think of it like that, I think that's the very, very, very much pronounced way of how to look at enhancing AI and adapting to AI.
And I love how you articulated that, because when I started with AI, and for me, I started with ChatGPT,
right?
I looked at my first couple of responses or prompts to the platform. I was like, this is just like another search engine.
Right.
Until I immersed myself, I really got in and started questioning, pushing, challenging the responses. I remember doing a live demo at one of the Microsoft campuses a couple of years ago, where I actually broke ChatGPT. I forced it to, spit out the incorrect answer. And at first it was like, no, I can't do this, and it's not ethical, and we can't do this. But the point I was trying to make for that audience was that you can't also trust this technology blindly either. You have to be in charge of what information is coming out. So you can't, you talk about regurgitating, but you can't just take whatever it gives you and then regurgitate it out to someone else and say, hey, you know what, I got it from AI. There's also accountability, because you also touched on personal brand. So that personal brand of yours can get tarnished or impacted, whether it's your organization or your individual brand, if you're not careful. And this is why I love what Microsoft did with this, is that it called it Copilot. It reminds you every single time who's in charge.
100%.
You are always in charge, and you need to be in charge of this technology and immerse yourself into it, and you make the most out of it, if you will.
It's a trust but verify, right? Ultimately.
Absolutely. And Rashawn, like, from an AI for sales perspective, because this is what you lead.
Right.
From what you're seeing, are organizations already using this technology for sales?
Yeah, I'm going to give you a little bit of a Microsoft pitch, so you have to forgive me for this one, right? But it's just so prevalent and so relatable to me just in terms of my day-to-day interaction. I think there's so many areas that you're seeing customers in the mid-market space specifically adopt AI. Now, just for context, I'm part of the mid-market organization in North America. So if you think about a mid-market customer, they're an average revenue of around 500 million to 3 billion in annual revenue. So in the mid-market space right now in North America, specifically based on the economical climate, these companies range on annual IT budgets of around 10 million per year, 2% of the annual revenue, essentially. And so when you think about these IT budgets, depending on the industry that they're in, when you think about these IT budgets, these companies are specifically investing in keeping the lights on, maintaining their IT costs, and then also trying to invest in how they become more profitable. So AI plays a key role in that. And that's broken up in a few different categories. So number one is the customer experience, is being able to enhance the way these companies are supporting customers, acquiring customers, providing better customer service. And I think when you look at the mid-market space today, just in terms of enhancing customer relationship management, how do you better know your customers? How you better create product for your customers, I think is a key and enhanced use case. The second piece is the employee experience, because knowing how you support customers better is one thing. Understanding them is another thing, right? And so a lot of the mid-market companies, again, going back to the average sizes that I mentioned, you can only imagine the amount of data sources these companies have. It's tremendous amounts of data sources, especially if they've been around for more than 10 to 15 years. They have a legacy of information that they're carrying to support the same market that's growing. And so that real employee experience, just in terms of understanding customers, is so, so important. Then the third area that we see a lot of momentum on, and this is obviously very prevalent for a lot of us in our day-to-day interactions, is operations internally within the company. So really optimizing operations. So if you think of a process that is enabled from one department, activated in another department, and then executed in another department, that creates an element of workflow, that creates an element of communication, that creates an element of employee engagement. And so that's a key piece that we see a lot of use cases on just in terms of AI adoption, right? Because there's quick wins there. And also the good thing with optimizing operations is if it breaks, is low risk, because you're not impacting an individual, you're not impacting a customer directly, right? And then the last area, TJ, like especially being in the mid-market space, and obviously you see this probably a lot based on the work you're doing, you do get a lot of startup companies, you do get a lot of companies that are early in their journey and have a big bang adoption of AI across the board, right? You have the likes of McKinsey, Deloitte, Accenture coming in, doing a full board assessment, coming up with 200-300 use cases, and then just going at it going after it and getting it to go live and getting it into production. So yeah, those are some of the areas. Again, a little bit of the Microsoft pitch there, but this is my reality in terms of the engagements that I have with our partners and customers.
It's fascinating, right? So you touched on something very critical with organizations that are in that space having so much data, right? Yeah. That data could be good or bad, depending on how you look at it as. A lot of organizations don't know what to do with that data, where to start. Do we release it to AI and then do we start getting information, or is it conditioned correctly? What are your thoughts on that? What should organizations who are in that space right now, it's like we've got so much data, not sure what to do with it. Do they just, open the floodgates, or do they ease in? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, there's so much I can say there, TJ. Let me just categorize it immediately off the bat, right? Number one is security. I think if you have several sources of data, it has to be secure before you can do anything else with it, right? It's kind of master of the obvious. That's kind of top of mind. If you're an organization that has heterogeneous data sources that are legacy, that are being brought on through divestiture, mergers and acquisitions, the number one thing you got to make sure that we do is security. The second thing is it's all dependent on the organization and dependent on the industry, to be honest. Data is an asset, right? Like when you look at data being an asset, then you have the opportunity to determine where you immediately apply that towards what specific use cases and what specific investments to determine what you can do and what the ROI looks like with that data. And so for me, I actually have I'm a DVA, by the way, from many years ago. And so I have a lot of experience in data. I think for me, the number one thing is having the data secure, having the data integrity applied to all your sources, determining where the quick ROIs are in terms of decision making, and whether it's through just intelligence of customers, intelligence of supply chain, intelligence of employee experience, intelligence of learning and engagement, intelligence of HR, right? There's a lot of different components that you can look at just across all your data sets to determine where you get the ROI from, and then apply AI to that to determine how AI can help you. Now, there's some really cool stuff in the market today for data with things like Fabric. And again, forgive me for the Microsoft pitch again, but there's things like Fabric that has this automated kind of extract, transform, load, ETL, brings data together, gives it nice presentation layers that's all in the very same UI user interface, and integrates real time, gives you better practices and recommendations on how to enhance use cases. And so there's a lot of technology for customers that, to your question, have many data sources can leverage in a very automated fashion. So I would say number one, security. Number two, determine your use cases from your estate and go after it with the technology at your disposal.
I love that. And I want to touch on security a little bit, because security is, let's lock something up, put it in a vault, and that's it. But I think there's also permissions and access, and who needs to get, access to what data at what time for what 100%. Purposes, right? How do you educate or inform an organization? How do they layer this? How do they structure this? Because this gets complicated, right? So what are your thoughts on how they need to structure their security protocols so that only the right people have access at the right times for the right reasons?
I love this conversation, by the way, right? Like, you're going to get me to geek out a little bit too much. So I got to be careful.
That's what we're here for.
So the number one thing you got to do is data governance, right? Like, you got to have data governance across the board, just in terms of the right layers of wrapping in your data. Because again, like going back to what we're talking about, if you have heterogeneous data sources within your organization that are also legacy on-prem and some in the cloud, you're exposing yourself to a risk, not just externally, but internally, right? You can plug in an AI tool. One of the most common questions I get, by the way, is you plug in an AI tool, and will I have an employee in my organization be able to access salary information of somebody from a different department because AI is now accessing my data? And that happens when you don't have good data governance, when you don't have data compliance. And I think the number one thing for organizations, you look at Silicon Valley today, you got 200 miles of companies that offer security solutions that do data. I mean, obviously Microsoft's number one, by the way. But like the data compliance role, just in terms of having the right levels of wrapping around your data, the governance, just in terms of ensuring that the data is governed by accessibility and user rights, is so important. You go into another layer above and beyond that. That's security information and event management, essentially a SIEM, common term in the security space that's being used. It's so important to have security information and event management on top of your data to ensure that when there is an event or when there's information that is leaking, or you're trying to avoid information leaking, it's so important to have that additional wrapper around your data. Of course, then third layer, I would say, is so important to have identity management, multi-factor authentication, ensuring every user has a single sign-on, has an identity, right? And so when you think of those three layers of security, super, super important if you're an organization that has multiple data sources with a data estate across the board. So yeah, a lot there for you, TJ, but happy to go deeper into any one of those.
Yeah, no, and I love, again, every aspect of it, because you touched on a few elements there. But one thing I want to touch on, we talked about governance, we talked about having the right layers and right protocols. What's the risk to an organization who doesn't have security figured?
Unfortunately, if you ask me how many risk stories I've seen out there, how many exposure stories I've seen out there, my answer is going to be way too many. And this is in the market. This is just by doing research. This is just by listening and observing to what's happening in the space of the growth of technology across the board. The evolution of technology right now has been compounding in its innovation of AI, right? And also multiple other tools, but AI specifically. And security has to play catch up and in some points to that curve. What happens is an organization, going back to the use cases that we talked about, investing into some of those use cases, having kind of that shiny-eyed syndrome to invest in getting and recognizing the ROI without being able to embed those security layers creates exposure of your data, creates exposure of your company's integrity across the board. What happens is, as an organization, when you talk to many of the CFOs, the financial leaders in a company, they have a projection of financial revenue growth per year that they're aspiring to achieve. Data exposure automatically reduces and increments that to a decline because of the risk you create for the company around overall profitability across the board. So that, for me, I think is so important, right? Like the company's integrity, the company's risk in a business, especially in the mid-market space. Of course, it's a big risk when you get into the financial services space that are the enterprise companies as well. When you look at the mid-market space, these companies are predicting an average revenue growth, generating the numbers that I mentioned earlier on. That data integrity is so imperative just to ensure that the right levels of governance and compliance are applied, but ensuring that it's not exposed and it's not at risk to be hacked.
You touched on a company's integrity. I mean, those are the core values of a company. If that gets compromised, that essentially puts the entire organization at risk.
Exactly.
So this is the power of that security, that, it needs to be front and center in all aspects, I think. You hinted at something, or you touched on something through that conversation that you were having, which is Microsoft is probably number one security organization out there. Tell me a bit more of that.
Yeah, 100%. It's a great question, by the way, because, you and I talked about the Microsoft reference earlier in the conversation, and you talked about Bing, right? I think sometimes when you think of Microsoft, you think of Windows and you think of Bing and you think about the popular stuff, right? Like a lot of the enterprise solutions are not at the forefront in terms of thought process of companies on how they see the Microsoft logo. Microsoft runs on trust. Like you'd see Satya talk about this all the time. Like we just had the Build conference last week, where Satya went pretty deep into how security is our number one priority in our organization, ensuring that we have the right and extreme layers of wrapping around our data, ensuring that we're providing the right levels of services to our customers via our entire suite, our entire stack of products, right? And so it's front and center for us internally in terms of everything we do. I personally, just like many other Microsoft employees, if not every other Microsoft employee, have a security priority that I'm accountable to every year to ensure that I, as an individual, as being a Microsoft employee, is empowered and activating and executing on my security priority. And what that essentially means is I'm adapting the policies of ensuring that I am running and managing and leading and contributing to a secure environment through my tools, my productivity, my engagement internally and externally. And so I think it's so important just to amplify and kind of replicate that in the business to ensure that everyone within an organization is accountable to the security priority. And then, of course, TJ, like our position in the market is we have an entire breadth of solutions across different product portfolio for security specifically. And we've been obviously driving a lot of momentum with that, primarily with the AI space right now, primarily with the growth in terms of data across the board, right? So yeah, that's pretty much what our position is from a security perspective.
It's quite deep from that perspective, and it's it goes horizontal across all the platform stack as well that you mentioned, because every single element has to be secured. If we understand security, usually it's the weakest link that allows any sort of penetration or any sort of access. So you can have everything else as strong as it needs to be, but the smallest, port or entryway into any set of data will expose the entire infrastructure organization. So it has to be paramount all across. You had mentioned something else, which was quite interesting. We were talking about, the loads of data, which was Fabric. Tell me a little bit more about Fabric and how it simplifies data and understanding that data an organization has.
When I think of Fabric, like I take off the name for a second and I think about an organization that has multiple different data sources as an example, and think about all those data sources being heterogeneous, so being different types of data, different brands of data, different mechanisms of what you might refer to as object, as big data, as efficient data, as relational data that you've inherited, right? So when you have a variety of different data sources, ultimately a chief technology officer, chief information officer, and obviously the data scientists within an organization are on a pursuit to simplify the way the company understands the data. Simple as that, right? That's the task. Simplify the way the company understands the data. So when you think about the objective would be, all right, how do you get all that data to communicate with each other or get it into one central repository, aka a data warehouse, aka a data lake? When you get all that data into a central repository, there's an element of integration that has to happen between those sources because they're all different. Or you migrate them to the singular source, which obviously takes a lot of work. When you get that data to communicate with each other and integrate with each other, you have to have an element of what you're extracting from each source, how you're transforming that and loading that into a central repository. When you have that and when you are at that level, then you want to be able to understand how you interpret that data, but present it also to the front-end accessibility user that's trying to understand the data, that needs to have a simplified way of interpreting it, translating it, and being better with decisions on it, right? So when you think of Fabric, just the Microsoft Azure portfolio across the board, it gives customers that entire flexibility to do exactly what I've described in an automated way, bringing all that data into an automated ETL, extract, transform, load way, or ELT if you refer to it that way. And then you have a presentation layer that's plugged on top of it that's able to understand that data. Again, heterogeneous sources, right? But bringing all that complex data into one central repository, simplified UI for presentation layers. Presentation layer is essentially analytics, business intelligence, and being able to understand that data to interpret it and make better decisions on it, right? Now that, TJ, is a very short, even though it might seem long, it's a very short version of Fabric. Right? I can go much, much more deeper into it.
That's a lot for anyone listening in and saying, I haven't even, dabbled with AI yet. I don't even understand where to begin. So what's your advice for leaders who feel like they're behind in the AI race? How do they get up to speed?
The most important thing is to get, going back to what I said earlier on, is immersion, right? Like adapting and embedding into AI is immersion. I think it's very easy. And it's easy for me to say also because I work for Microsoft. I'm in a corporate organization. I'm not a senior leader in a mid-market business or an SMB business, right? So it might be easy for me to say because I'm not in that role. But from my conversations and experiences, I think the most important thing is there's a lot of buzz and there's a lot of publicity and there's a lot of marketing, and it's easy to look at that, especially if competitors are using it. It's easy to look at that and have the notion of wanting to play catch up. And I think that sometimes can be a good thing, but not always a good thing until you really understand what you're trying to accomplish in your business in terms of the use cases within your organization. And so my recommendation to business leaders is to always determine the ROI that you're trying to go after based on specific use cases that is aligned to the company's growth, and determine where AI plays a role in that, right? And of course, immersion. Like the quick wins, there's several quick wins that business leaders can adopt to what I was describing earlier on to get momentum. Like I'll give you one very simple one that I've heard about very recently. In an organization, when you're training new employees, there's the onboarding experience, there's the training and enablement that has to happen. There's the company's diversity and inclusion policies. There's just the overall company's training policies. Then AI, using an agent, it'll allow you to accelerate how you onboard employees by having readiness in a much more accelerated time period that is much more applicable to the role profile of the individual that's coming into the organization. And that's a use case of immersion, I think, right? Like that's a real use case that's kind of a quick win that you can immerse yourself into as an organization. So yeah, that's kind of my advice in terms of going after AI.
There's a distinction when we look at immersion from using AI personally versus using it for your business, because
Yeah.
now it's not as easy anymore. It's not as easy to jump right in because, again, security protocols, teams, departments, access, permission, like you name it, all of that starts playing a factor. And if you're not comfortable with the technology, then you hesitate and you're just like, maybe tomorrow, maybe another day, and you just never get into it. And you're always behind. What's your direct, I guess, advice on leaders there? Who can they partner up with inside the organization to at least start getting comfortable, asking the right questions, or more importantly, what kind of roles should they start bringing in and hiring for in their organizations to enable AI?
I love that question, TJ. It's such a good question because it's so unique to specific organizations in terms of the structure and the mode of growth that they're in. I think ultimately, when you look at the adoption of any technology, it's either the overall transformation or it's phases of transformation through a multi-horizon, right? And that is dependent on how you get the actual buy-in and the sponsorship of that change management, essentially. And I've been in the ERP for a long time, right? And I know when you're changing the finance system as an overall transformation as the spine of the organization, if your CEO, your CFO is not bought in, and if there's that lack of alignment on the overall change management, is a very difficult thing to do. Just like with AI, if you're innovating across the board and you're enhancing the entire company processes, that is essentially impacting the spine of the organization's operational structure, very difficult to do without having a CEO, a board, a CFO, CIO, and CTO buy-in. On the other side, when you're taking a more of a horizontal approach, where you're going through different phases of how you're embedding use cases, it's so important to your question around what role profiles you apply towards those use cases. Existing role profiles, key. New role profiles, great. Existing role profiles like your chief technology officer, your chief operations officer, as well your chief sales officer, your revenue officer, your HR officer. Like a lot of your roles today have a pursuit key performance indicator for growth of that specific business unit. And when you look at those growth drivers, you have to factor in how AI plays a role in those growth drivers to determine what the return of investment is to embed in those use cases. But again, it has to be sponsored by the senior level team, or at least the executive team within an organization, to go and ultimately get momentum on that. I hear so often, though, on the other side of it, where senior level execs, CEOs of companies, have absorbed a lot of the greatness that comes out of these technology conferences, LinkedIn, just information that comes across the board, right? And CEOs task CIOs, CTOs with the requisition of, what are we doing with AI? And now suddenly you see CIOs and CTOs like, well, our CEO is like, hey, we got to catch up to this thing. And is asking, what are we doing? Every time I see him around the water cooler, it's like, hey, what are we doing with AI? You guys rolled out Copilot yet? And so you see a lot of that, right? And so I think really helping the chief leaders, the technology leaders, the information officers, the operation officers, just understanding how to get better immersed, the ones that really have the appetite to, that are looking for guidance. I think we play a role as Microsoft, like TJ, with what you're doing. We play a key role in terms of the education we provide, kind of the hand-holding, if you will, the guidance and the enablement, right? So I think like what you're doing, just in terms of the AI work that you have going on with the podcast, with what you're doing on LinkedIn, I think you play a key role in that, just in terms of that education and that enabling with customers that are on that journey, that want to learn more and want to be more immersed. So that's kind of how I see it. That's kind of the experiences that I've been having in terms of my conversations with customers.
What are your thoughts on leaders who don't adapt AI or are resisting it? What's the future look like for them?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I can't be the judge and juror for a decision-making process within an organization around adaptability to technology, right? Because the translation to that is determined by the company itself. For example, have I seen companies that operate in a very legacy fashion, that still have dot matrix printers and run their business through like old school telephony equipment and networking as well? Yeah. Are they still profitable? Yeah. Can they be more profitable? Can they grow with AI? Yes. Do they want to? No. right? So I think there's a lot of that company legacy, company identity that defines how a company resists or applies. And I think that's so important, right? Like TJ, if you and I were running a business today and we were like running it on old school technology and we were profitable, and you and I looked each other in the eye and we're like, well, this business is not our priority because we got other things we're doing. So we're probably not going to put AI in this business because it's running, right? So we're going to be resisting AI, right? But we might be having other things going on that we will probably apply AI to. So I think it's a matter of just understanding company identity, company policy, because there are companies that are quote unquote resisting. I think it's just underneath what that means.
And so, and let's, maybe peel that back a bit, right? Because a lot of organizations do resist, at least from one that I interact with or engage with, is because they can't figure out what use case they want to go after. And when they look at AI, and the way the picture of AI is painted is that it solves everything, right? But AI doesn't. When we really peel it down, it actually solves one specific problem at a time. And a combination of those problems come together, and then you see AI doing automation and things like that. But that use case, what's your advice on organizations finding what that first use case needs to be so that it's easy to do, but gives them validation that this technology actually works and solves that purpose?
This is a tough question, by the way, TJ, right? Because it's not a one size fits all. Like, it's hard to paint everybody with the same brush. And it's also hard to be oblivious to realities of companies' data, use cases that might be efficient, that can't use AI, for example, right? And I want to make sure I preface my response with that for sure. When you think of a company that's really struggling with the use case, ultimately, if you're a business going back to SMB and mid-market sizes, if you're a business that has data, I fundamentally believe that you have opportunity. If you're a business that's growing year over year in terms of making more money, reducing risk in the organization, selling more product, like your typical business outcomes as a company, those outcomes are typically fueled by data. And though that data has specific departments that run with data to execute those business outcomes. And when I think of those traditional business outcomes, I think there's always use cases to enhance productivity to get that year-over-year growth. If you don't have business outcomes, difficult to use AI, right? So that's kind of my guidance. If you're struggling, any company struggling, I think it's so important to just look at the outcome, even the incremental cases that contribute to the outcome, how they adapt, how you can adapt them, and how it makes sense to the organization. I think also another thing is that you got to have the right levels of patience. You got to have the right levels of understanding. Sanitization, I think, is just so important, right? You have to be able to sanitize what you're applying and what you're expecting. Because when you apply something and you have a different expectation that's misaligned, you kind of have a negative reaction to what you're actually doing. We do a phenomenal job in the market right now across the board with AI. And it's very, very, very easy to consume that and translate that as an overnight change for a use case. And it can be. It's not always like that.
Absolutely. And I think there was a recent client I was working with, and they engaged me and brought me in, and they were in a state of panic. They thought they were going to go bankrupt. They thought their business was over because they weren't adapting AI. And I had to calm them down. Like, we're still early in certain aspects. Like, let's relax a little bit. In terms of the number of organizations that are using AI and adapting to it, and they're starting. Yes, if they don't start now and they don't start exploring and they don't start understanding what the impact of this technology is to their business, their competitors are going to leverage it. Their competitors are going to use it. And that is going to impact the business. But there's still time. There's still time to engage, get help from the right resources. So you don't have to figure it out all by yourselves. You can actually engage organizations, something similar to what my organization does, or what Microsoft does if they're a partner with those organizations, to get the help and the assistance and the guidance, more importantly, on how to navigate the AI landscape. Because without that guidance, it becomes very tricky to figure out, because it spans across everything they can touch in their business, essentially.
100%. 100%.
I'm going to ask you a question here, which, navigates towards the transition from organizations going into leveraging this technology. Recently, there was a prominent CEO who said, with the help of AI, we can see a single employee running $1 billion company by 2026. How close are we to that reality, given how fast AI is moving and how fast these agents are starting to come up.
Yeah, I get very nervous about predictions, TJ. I'll be honest.
I love predictions.
I get very nervous about contributing to predictions only because of my role, right? Like I want to make sure that I'm grounded in reality and not oblivious to the things I don't know. For me to contribute to something like that, right? Like here's what I will say: as a leader at Microsoft, as being part of the technology organization for pretty much technology industry for pretty much most of my career, I think statements like that have a lot of energy behind it and are very exciting and are pretty believable, right? In terms of what we have at our disposal right now for us to get there, I think is really, really prevalent and pronounced. We do. But I do think we have an economical wave that is happening to us on a different frequency, right? And right now, if you're a company in North America from a supply chain perspective, there's adaptability that has to happen in terms of how you run your business. There's risk that is exposed as well, right? So there's economical climate, I think, that sometimes contributes to how we advance and enhance and invest in productivity tools and technology innovation and transformation that sometimes can contribute to some of those bold statements, right? Do I like it? Yes. Is it highly energizing? Yes. Do we have what we need to get there? Yes. Can I make that prediction? No.
Oh, I love that. I love that. Well, and it makes sense, right? Listen, like, I mean, there's organizations that have hundreds and thousands of employees and they do a certain amount of revenue. And if you can find the efficiencies, you can obviously reduce the number of, your organizational size and footprint and still have a similar or identical profit and profitability. 3, 5, or 10 individuals within an organization that are now able to run multi-million-dollar organizations, right? So are we headed in that direction? I believe so. Are we going to get there by 2026? I don't know. That's an interesting one, right? I'll put my bets in there as well. But it's fascinating to see where we're headed and what we're actually building and developing. But if you can find a use case that solves a particular problem and that for the masses, then yeah, it's possible. If we can't, it's going to be very tricky, right? I think is how I look at it.
Absolutely. I mean, like I said, and you described it there, right? We're in such an energizing and exciting space right now. Just fun, quick story for you. I was watching a documentary on Nat Geo a couple of weeks ago, and my wife and I were talking about it, and they were representing how they tag whales in specific parts of the ocean to determine when the whales go through specific cycles of mating and how they track where they can actually have different mood types of whales, right? So these devices, kind of like Internet of Things almost, that translates these signals into a tool that then interprets and recognizes patterns, but then also has specific times on when you can monitor those whales, right? And you look at stuff like that and you're like, wow, we're in a pretty cool space, right? For us to do that, but then also produce it and put it on TV so people like actually watch it, right? So it's like, yeah, it's just a very, very exciting space we're at with technology across the board.
It's fascinating. You reminded me of a story. We were working on a project. I was running the IoT business at the time, and there was a large agriculture and farming organization, and they had a problem. The problem was their cattle would tip over and fall into a ditch. No one would know because they've got hundreds and thousands of them. Right. And then they would end up dying and obviously impacts their inventory and livestock. So they tagged all of these cattle and basically almost like a Fitbit, so they can see how many steps they're moving around. What's fascinating about this data, Rashaan, is they started seeing certain cows starting moving a lot more, almost double or triple the amount of steps that they would normally take. And this happened periodically, and they couldn't understand what it was until they started looking into the data, analyzing it. And they realized that when a cow actually went into heat, it would actually took more steps. Usually you'd have the farmer identify and understand what's going to happen and when the mating is going to happen. They actually started taking that information, interestingly enough, started mating the cows early on in that process. And the probability of having a female calf went up by 90%.
Wow.
Just through that process. Again, solving for one problem and getting a solution to a whole other. And it was quite fascinating. So to your point, that data, you just don't know what it's going to lead to. You have no idea what's going to come out of it. And half the time, I think it will surprise you and say, well, we had no idea we could actually do this, or this is what our business was telling us. So this is, quite fascinating what the data can do. I want to switch gears just a little bit.
Yeah.
You've obviously, led teams from different nationalities, different cultural mixtures and stuff as well. What's your biggest challenge that you as a leader have to adapt to ensure that everyone is treated in a similar manner or equally?
And so I think challenges come along in different stages, I think, of careers. And if your question is more relating to what advice I would give to leaders or my personal experiences, maybe I can give you both. I think number one, I think is patience. I think, experience fuels a certain level of knowledge and maturity in the role function, right? Always. And I think when you are fueled by a certain level of experience and maturity in a role function, it's easy to be, I wouldn't say fixed, but it's easy to kind of know a lot. It's kind of easy to know a lot because your experience kind of fuels how you react, how you engage, how you plan, execute, etc. And I think sometimes patience can be submarined by experience and just legacy ways of doing things. And I think it's so important to just make sure that you're self-aware and you're cognizant of that as you move to different teams, as you lead different cultures, as you lead different groups, but also how you evolve as a leader. And so I say that because that's been one of my challenges, right? It's an easy thing for me to say to dispose of great advice. It's a hard thing to be self-aware and look in the mirror and acknowledge that too. And I think that's so important, right? Because you move at a race at 9,000 RPM, sometimes based on the function of your role, but not everybody else is in that same pace as well. And sometimes if you don't have the patience, you can easily translate that element to the folks around you that impacts the culture. So I think that's a challenge for sure that has to be grown upon. I think just overall as a leader, you play a leadership role in every role that you do in an organization. I don't think it's specifically based on hierarchy. And I think when you play a leadership role within every part of an organization, I think the most important thing is how do you communicate? I call it the CID approach, right? Like how do you communicate? How do you influence? And how do you direct? I think communication is key. Communication underneath that is listening and curiosity. And I think one of the challenges sometimes is again, experience fuels how we communicate versus listen. I think it's so important to just understand the difference sometimes, right? Because that then impacts how you influence. Influence is not necessarily a bad thing. Don't confuse influence with persuasion. I think influence is so important just in terms of the more you understand of a team, of an individual, the more you have the ability to influence the success, not for you, but for everybody. And then being able to decide, being able to direct, I think is so important, right? Because once you're able to communicate effectively, influence successfully, and then direct, you're able to drive an impact across the board and help the collective achieve the collective goals. So that's kind of, I think, some of the challenges that I see like real time and I've personally experienced across my career way too many times.
On the flip side, what traits do you look for when building high-performing teams that you're navigating and managing such a large territory such as North America? So what does that look like for you? Because there's, it's having team members in Canada can be very different than having team members in the US, right? So how do you strategically position or plan from, that cultural fit perspective? So they bond internally, but they also manage and address their regional needs.
I love this question so much, TJ, because I feel like when we ask this question about high performers, looking for high performers, hiring high performers, building high performers, the leader takes all the credit for that. I don't think it's that. Because I can't take any credit for any of that, right? I think a role as a leader is to identify a high performer. I think of it in two ways. I think of it in the identification of a high performer is essentially this. How do you create the space for somebody to be at their best? Because you could classify somebody as a low performer because they had a bad day and the people around them were not able to create the space or acknowledge the bad day that they were in. Doesn't mean they're a low performer though, right? And one bad day doesn't make you a low performer. And I think that's so important as a leader, right? Like it's just creating the space. Going into an interview as an example, assessing a profile for a role that you have open. I think it's so important to create the right level of space and empathy and comfort for the candidate based on what you're looking for from the candidate. Like, do you want to see the candidate nervous and trip up, or do you want to see the candidate show up as their best? I think it's a difference there, right? And I think that's so important in terms of the categorization of high performers. I think the second piece as well is having a high performing team comes from your ability to be humble to learn from the high performing team. The team can't be high performing if you're telling everybody how to be high performing. And I think it's so important, right? And it's kind of the individual sport versus the team sport, as I like to talk about it. The individual sport, I always talk about how you work internally in yourself. Working internally in yourself doesn't mean you go and drive all the results. Work internally in yourself means how do you listen better? How do you have better empathy? How do you create space? And then the team sport is how do you use that space and that environment for the high performers to be high performers. And I think that's so important, TJ, right? When you think of this whole notion of building high performance and building high performing teams, it's how do you activate that high performance out of the individuals around you? That's the key. So that's kind of been something I've learned over the years. I am nowhere close to perfecting that or being great at that. I try every day, or at least I hope to try every day, to operate and function in that capacity.
No, this is great. Rishan, like there's so many things I still want to talk to you about. And I think I want to have you back on again for just a segment on personal branding, because I wanted to pick your brain on that aspect. But with, the time that we have, I do want to wrap it up with a rapid fire segment. But then I would definitely want to commit you to coming back on the episode again so that we can dig into personal branding. So let's jump into the rapid fire segment. You ready to go?
Let's do it.
Yeah. Rules are simple. I'm going to ask you a question. First thing comes top of mind. Coffee or tea?
Coffee.
Okay. One skill a leader can't live without.
Yes, listening.
First thing you do every morning.
Depends on the season. Right now, I'm trying to get physical. I'm working on my fitness.
Amazing. Your personal definition of success in one word.
Being a great dad, great father. I have my own personal scorecard. That's dad, father, sibling, son, community member.
Most important in 2025, relationships or tech? And I think I already have an idea of the answer, but let's go with relationships or tech.
Relationships, for sure. Relationships.
Okay. Most underrated sales skill.
Prospecting.
One book that changed how you lead.
The Infinite Game by Simon Sinek.
And if you could talk to any animal besides any pets you have, which one would it be?
The lion.
I want to know more about the lion. Why the lion?
Because of the lion's ability to be so organized and definitive and instinctive, and also be able to cultivate a family environment with a community of other lions and be so protective over that community. It's a pretty special level of intelligence and intuition.
And it goes right back to your relationships aspect, right? Like that's so fascinating. So it kind of shows from what you live by and what you focus on as part of your leadership trait. So, Rishan, thank you very much. It was honestly a great pleasure to have you on. I've learned so much. Love the conversation. Definitely want to have you back on for personal branding. I think that's going to be an element that we want to talk about as well. Any final words for our listeners?
Likewise, thank you so much for the great work you're doing, by the way. And hope this was valuable for you and for anybody that's watching. I appreciate you having me on. And yeah, just super cool conversation. Love all the work you're doing. So yeah, thank you. Thank you so much.
Rishan, thank you very much for that incredible conversation. I've learned so much. I can't wait to have you back on again to talk about personal branding and the importance of it in today's day and age. And for our listeners, thank you for tuning in. If you have any questions, put them in the comments below. We'll make sure we can address them or cover those topics in a future episodes. Until then, keep on inspiring.